Welcome to this rainy night edition of the Legislative Update. I'm Bradford Raths, sitting in for Bill Potter, and tonight Mark Messmer has returned.
Very good. Good to be here again, as always.
So you've got some of your own legislation going through now, actually getting hearings in the House. It's passed the Senate.
Yep. Had two bills that were passed during the first half of the session that I've met with the committee chairman and all the committees that my bills went to, just to make sure they understood what legislation that I had filed, what it did, the details of it. So met with all the chairmen that are going to hear the bills, and two of them got put on next week's calendar, so pretty happy about that. The Senate Bill 336 deals with the library board. It will directly help Jasper, Bainbridge Township in their library district, but could help cities across the state. So that's going to be heard on Thursday. And then Senate Bill 546 was the chemical abortion language, kind of tweaking some issues that popped up from a bill we passed 2 years ago that a federal court said was too restrictive to Planned Parenthood. So we broadened the measure, struck the restrictive language out, made it apply to any medical facilities that do more than 5 prescriptions of that product per year, and then clarified some of the reporting that all healthcare providers need to provide to the Department of Health on terminated pregnancies. So that'll be heard on Wednesday in public policy. So those two look like they're well on track to succeed in the second half of session. And the other bills, I think the farm winery bill is scheduled to be heard the following week in public policy. So excited to get that one moving again. And then had a couple of House bills that I'm sponsoring in the Senate that were heard on Monday in natural resources. And one was House Bill 1617, and that deals with, in Indiana and most states that have potential for a lot of underground mining, whether it's gypsum, limestone, coal, the person who owns the rights, the property rights on the surface may or may not be the same person that owns the mineral rights underground. And in cases where this pops up, specifically where it's a problem, is maybe in an area that had an underground coal mine 60, 70, 80 years ago, and it might have had a rail spur that went for maybe a mile or two underground to that coal mine. The coal company has since went out of business, bankrupt, changed companies, and you may not know who actually who still is the owner of the underground mine, or the 50-foot wide by 2-mile long, old underground right away for the train tracks that went into it. And now, say, Peabody or one of the coal companies is now doing an underground mine, and they hit an area where the owner can't be determined. House Bill 1617 allows them to go to the courts, petition to kind of identify that area, set aside the royalties that they would need to go through that area, and then they'll set up a 7-year window where they'll continue to search for the underground mineral right owner. If they can't find them, then the surface owner would become the recipient of those royalties for that stretch of minerals that they mined. If for some reason they can't find a surface owner, maybe it was a township school that went. There could be some scenarios where you might not know the surface owner. Usually you can find somebody who owns the property, above ground, and still if you can't determine an owner, then the township trustees would get those royalties. But in the meantime, they'd put them in an account that would be maintained by the clerk in each county. So gives them a way to deal with those unknown underground mineral right owners, and that passed unanimously out of the House committee on Monday. Had its second reading yesterday and will be eligible for final vote on Monday.
I apologize. My more recent closures in like Pike County and places like that. What kind of effect is that going to do for those?
Anybody if you can identify the current owner, it doesn't affect the negotiations or who's going to get the royalty for those minerals if you can identify the owner. But typically it's been an underground mine that was operated decades ago, usually more than 50. If it's something more current, you're going to have titles or tax records or something that you can trace an owner back to, or an estate. But sometimes it's a company that went bankrupt 80 years ago, and there was never any transfer of title or transfer of deed on that, and so it just becomes a mystery. So most states that have a lot of underground mining have statutes similar to this. We copied most of the language from the statutes in Illinois, that deal with that. We said, okay, whenever you're kind of crafting a new section of code, what's typical across the country? And so we looked at the 8 or 10 states that have similar language to this, looked at how they're all structured, and copied most of the concepts from what Illinois does.
You had another House bill.
House Bill 1208. It was one that was authored by Representative Arnold, and so he's got the south half of the county. It allows the Department of Natural Resources to set up a bonus buck program to let them basically auction off another 100 buck permits for deer hunters. You have to have bought a deer license during the regular season, and used it. And then there would be a $30 entry fee, and allow as many people as want to apply for those, and then they'll pull 100 names, and then let those folks have an opportunity late in season to go out and maybe get a second buck. There's 125 to 140,000 deer that are harvested per season, so that DNR felt comfortable with, let's start it at 100, let's see what the participation rate is. It gives the DNR an opportunity to from that entry fee to make it, to make a few, some money to help operate their budgets, and so they were positive and very supportive of it. That passed out of committee unanimously as well on Monday, and be up for final passage this coming Monday again too. So we'll see how it goes, if it works well, and even if they give out 100 tags for 100 additional deer, the odds are maybe 30 to 50% of the hunters will actually get one in that extra week. But we'll see how it goes, and then we can always say it worked well. Let's let it grow to a number where they feel like they're not hurting deer herd sizes, and then maybe at some point they could even craft it more specifically per county. But right now it's 100 extra tags statewide.
Of course, there's several areas of the state that still have high deer populations.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So there'd probably be adjustments down the road if they grow it and like the way the program's working. But this will kind of get their feet wet, let them try it for a year or two, and then see how it goes. But passed out of the House unanimously. I would expect smooth sail on Monday, but you never know in this place what can happen.
Absolutely. Now, moving to more broad issues, obviously the elephant in the room being the state budget. You guys have already had a couple hearings, but that's going to continue as we head to next week. Yeah,
the Appropriations Committee has heard, they've had agencies come in. I think this week they had higher education come into their committee, and then they had a special hearing for adjustments to the school funding formula for K through 12. And it's K through 12 funding alone is 53% of the budget. Higher education gets another 15%, so it's about 2/3 of our budget that's committed to education. So it takes a high priority, takes the lion's share of the House and Senate appropriations and Ways and Means Committee time. And we've looked pretty closely at the funding formula that the House set up, and the amount of extra dollars, about 470 million additional dollars into K through 12. We're pretty comfortable with the direction they took on that. We'll probably tweak it a little bit, look at maybe they did make some changes in the House budget on changing the amount of money that's given for the free and reduced lunch portion of the budgets, and rather than take that change in 1 year, we're looking at maybe stepping that transition in over a few years period. So schools that had a high percentage of the free and reduced lunch students maybe don't see such an immediate impact, on this year's budget. Kind of glide into that over maybe a 2, 3, 4 year period. We had another transition to base that started 7 years ago, and we're in the last year of that this year, or this coming school year. Just from old funding formulas we had, there was quite a variation between schools here on what they were getting, maybe compared to schools at IPS, and that transition was done over a 7-year period to help soften, the blow in getting everybody's baseline numbers the same. We're going to add about $500 per student to every school's baseline numbers this year, which that alone is a and then by bringing up the base that much, we're lowering the percentage of extra money you get for free and reduced lunch. So if you're in a school district that had declining enrollment and had a high percentage of free and reduced lunch, you're probably getting a little squeeze from this year's budget. If you didn't have both of those things impacting at the same time, you're seeing some increase. And if you weren't a high free and reduced lunch, and you've got enrollment numbers climbing or staying steady, then you're seeing probably a 2 to 3% increase in the districts. And across my district, it's ranging about 2 to 3% per year for most of the schools, which is welcome relief.
Mm-hmm. One brief point before we move to the next issue is this idea of the complexity index. People may or may not have read about that. Can you just kind of give an overview of what that is?
When I started the complexity index, my first year that they did budgeting, it included about a half dozen different factors. So they added things, they divided things, they ended up with a multiplier to everybody's funding formula, and it was a complex process. Now that complexity index is all they really look at is the number of students that are on free and reduced lunch. I mean, that's their only factor that they look at, giving you extra money for basically low income families. And this year the House budget had a $2,000 per student extra bump for the free and reduced. That grant for the free and reduced lunch portion of your budget was about $2,000 per student. I think it was more like $2,500 in prior years. So that percentage of that went down. The base for all kids went up. So and we're gonna look at maybe is there another more statistically accurate. Do you go to each county? Do you go to FSSA? And maybe look at their number of families on food stamps. Is there a number that you can get that's a real statistical number that you can get? I mean, right now, families that sign up for free and reduced lunch at the beginning of the school year, the school sends out a form, says, do you want to sign up? And there's no income check, there's no validation of those, of who's eligible or not. If the families fill out the form and send it in, you're in. And the state is allowed to audit 3% of those per year. That's it, statewide, and those have to be random. So they do catch some fraud in that program, occasionally. But if they're only auditing 3% of that total population, it's not a very reliable number. We have used in the past the amount of families on free textbook rentals, which is something we can audit. They've used that in lieu of free and reduced lunch, but right now the House budget had the free and reduced lunch families in that complexity index multiplier, and we'll look at is another more accurate way maybe the food stamp number in your county or in your district, because that's a number we can get from the government, that from Family and Social Service Agency, that's going to be right on. We don't have to rely on somebody to give us that number or families to just turn in a form. So that'll be probably the how we tweak that number and where that number comes from.
So as we wrap up tonight, we're going to talk, obviously this is not quite ready to be done yet, but the casino debate that's ongoing, and obviously there's a casino just up the road in French Lick. They're going to turn out pretty well from what I understand.
As the budget left, or the gaming bill left the House, French Lick's concerns got addressed pretty well, that we were able to keep they had a change factored into it. Most of the casinos would like to get rid of what they call the entry fee portion of it, and they have to keep track of the numbers of people that come in and out of the casino, and then pay a $3 per person fee to local government for some of their funding mechanisms. That all that money is used for local economic development. None of the casinos really like that way of doing it, and they look for some ways to change their tax rates and let them pay a different percentage of their gross, that goes to the local funding in lieu of having to turn in a number of, actual $3 per person. So as the bill left the House, the racinos in Shelbyville and Anderson want to get live dealers. So they agreed as part of the process of them getting live dealers at the racinos, that they would pay to French Lick. If they got rid of the entry fee, they would pay the county from the racinos to French Lick their equivalent, the amount of their losses. So it would allow French Lick, but when the racinos go to live dealers, probably the single biggest casino that was going to be impacted by the Indianapolis market not going to their casino is French Lick. I mean, most of the economic studies showed that. So it was going to allow them to have that same dollars available for local government, but get paid for out of the racinos, who are going to see probably a increase in volume, and then their overall tax rate got lowered to 5%. Of the first 75 million of their sales, or the dollars generated at the French Lick Casino. And there's a couple of what I'll call low volume casinos. French Lick's one. I think Rising Sun is another one that's a pretty low volume operation. We'll probably see some other tax rate changes for the other casinos that are similar to what French Lick had in the House budget. Evansville's casino is probably one of the boats that is more likely to want to move on land, and they made some changes in the House Bill 1540, I think was the actual legislation, that allows that to happen. We would need to do some minor adjusting to that, because some of the wording, the folks who actually are looking at moving a boat would have to tweak a little bit of the details of that bill as it left the House, but it looked pretty favorable to Evansville for what they were wanting. Looked pretty favorable for French Lick, and then we'll probably each of the other geographic areas have minor concerns of adjustments they'd like to see. Hopefully, we can get everybody's interest pulled together and get a situation where they all benefit one way or another, either by a lower rate, or they have a incentive program called Free Play, where maybe they send out a gift card or whatever to people who are past patrons of a casino. And currently, anything above what they call $5 million per year of Free Play, they pay their gross. Even if somebody brings in once they give out more than that or use more than that per year, they end up paying gaming tax on any Free Play above that amount that they give out as promotional dollars. It seems kind of crazy to pay taxes on gift cards for them, but and some of the casinos would just like to see that amount over time raised to maybe 10 million or have a transition to where that no matter how much of that they use, they're not paying taxes on gift cards that they're giving out, because some of them they're doing quite well, but that promotional money like that they give out is really their number one most effective way to getting past customers back to play again. So they'd like to see that changed. That would satisfy probably the lion's share of other concerns some of the other casinos had. But hopefully by the time we're done, we get something that works well for all of them involved and helps them be more competitive with Ohio and Michigan and Illinois and potentially Kentucky in just a few years down the road.
And not to be underrated is even smaller casinos like French Lick are big sources of economic development.
They are. They still are pretty, and especially for French Lick, they become a destination. I mean, they've got the golfing, they've got the nice, you got the West Baden, you got the French Lick Hotel, you got the casino, and they've really worked well at promoting it as a tourist destination. They've built a nice convention center there, so there's a lot of things they've done that could easily help them, instead of seeing their sales drop, year after year, as they all have seen, somewhat, as the other states have come online. They're really looked at with all they've done to help, develop that, those old hotels and get them back up and running. They're doing a nice job of promoting that as a tourist destination, and if there's things we can do to help, help make it work better for them, we need to help them try to be more competitive. And I think that bill is going to get there eventually.
Well, Mark, we thank you for joining us once again this
You're
evening.
welcome.
That's this week's edition of the Legislative Update. Thank you for watching WJTS Inform. We are local people watching local people.